Hello, judges. I don't know if you can hear me right now. If you can just put in chat, like if you're able to hear things like very well, that there's no issues. Mm. Like that's all good. Okay, thank you very much.
Good afternoon, distinguished guests, faculty members, and fellow students, and welcome to our second day of the annual symposium of CQ-AState. To begin with, I'd like to pass the microphone to Dr. Cesar Iriarte, Director of Business, to officiate the opening of this event.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone. I am very excited to be here and to present to you the second day of the Create at A-State, where we're going to be featuring projects that were carried out by our business students. It's a special moment for us because this is the first time since the creation of the Create at A-State when we have multiple participation, right? And so that makes me very proud. So the floor today is not for me, it's for our students. So I'll let the students do the talking and presentation of the high quality research that they did during the semester. Thank you very much.
The first topic presented will be, what is the relationship between GDP growth and informality in states with a higher incidence of violence in Mexico? Presented by Fernanda Daniela García Senil, Amanda López Hernández, and Emanuel Rosas Flores. Please welcome them.
Feminist movement and women's home office at CQ. ¿Cambia mucho? Sí. Sí, cambia mucho. ¿Tienes en USB? No, no sé. La podemos hacer.
where we have high rates of violence overall country. So for this study, the data was mainly obtained from INEGI, and it was collected by the Encuesta Nacional de Victimización and Percepción sobre la Seguridad. So these are the 5 different variables we are considering for our violence index, which are crime incidence, security perception, police perception, jail population, and population living under poverty. For the panel data regression, we are considering logarithm GDP, informality, and the violence index. So these 2 variables were obtained from the Sistema Nacional de Cuentas de México. Also, we have 22,088 observations, which correspond to the different 32 states of Mexico from the years 2011 to 2019.
So what is it exactly that we did? We used a principal component analysis to gather the components of our weighted average. This is able to do so because it explains variance ratios that are used to identify underlining relative importance of the components and therefore capturing the overall variability of the model. After including the component analyses, we created our weighted average using the variables we just mentioned, and we repeated this process for all of the 32 states around the period of time we just mentioned. After that, to make it more prettier and have an index from 0 to 1, we normalized the data using our minimum, that was Oaxaca in 2012, and maximum, which was Nuevo León in 2019.
Whereas for the panel data regression, we have a balanced panel data corresponding to 32 different states as the subjects, and the time period is from 2011 to 2019. So here we basically can see that the change in the logarithm GDP are going to depend into the changes in the violence index and the changes in the logarithm informality. This regression was fixed effects with time effects.
So for starters, we want to explain what the PCA is. What it is like, imagine a Cartesian plane in which we have variables all around it, and what it's trying to do is move its axis until it fits it in the best way possible to explain the relationship between the volatility of the data.
Now let's get into the results of the violence index. Thanks. So here we can see some heat maps for the years 2011, 2013, 2015, and our most recent year, 2019. This will allow us to see how the levels of violence have been evolving for each state. So here the levels of violence are divided into high violence, medium violence, and low violence. Except for the year 2013, where the distribution of the data allowed us to add another category that it corresponds to medium high violence. So as you can see, some of the states that we can perceive as more violent are categorized in high levels, like Sonora, Sinaloa, Guadalajara, and Nuevo León, whereas those that could be perceived as less violent are like Quintana Roo, San Luis Potosí, and so on. Also, overall, we can see that in 2015, there was like more states categorized in the low levels of violence, whereas in 2019, we can see that even though there's not as many states categorized in the highest levels of violence as in 2011, there are more states categorized in the medium levels of violence. So we can see that overall it is increasing.
So it is important to mention that this is an ongoing research. So our results are not final yet. There are preliminary results. However, we are able to identify some valuable insights that are pointing towards the direction of our research being correct. For example, here in our TS line, we can see that there was a drop in violence in 2015, which is consistent with what the reports from the Institute of Economics and Peace is. They created a peace index, which states that 2015 had a betterness of 10.25%. This is obvious. We have an inverse relationship between peace and violence. It also states that in 2014, there was a lack of betterment. There was a drop in peace, and we can see it here. There was an increase in peace in 2014 as well. It is also inconsistent to research from Ibero University in the security of citizens, which states that 2019 and 2020 have had historically high homicidal violence, which is also seen here as an increase. We included this table. It defeats the purpose of an index to have an average of them. However, for time, we cannot present to you, even though we'd love to, each of the years in each of the states. However, here is a ranking of the average violence we found in each of the states. And it is very much in accordance to what we are seeing and we have been seeing. For example, we have Nuevo León very up there, as well as Tamaulipas. However, we have to consider that in accordance to the variables that we are measuring, there are certain constraints in like the underreporting of crime. We are choosing crime incidents. However, we do not have the certainty that all of the crimes are being reported. As well as we're not taking into consideration anything directly related to drugs and cartels, which may also influence the results.
So now that we are going to get into the panel data regression, I just want to remind you quickly that we are testing the effects of the natural logarithm of informality and or violence index into the natural logarithm of GDP. So here we have the results. As you can see, the violence index was found to be statistically significant with a positive change of 32.4 percentage points into the natural logarithm of GDP. Whereas the informality was found as not statistically significant, and also the intercept is relevant. So this reminds us that we have to take into consideration that each state is different, that they have different starting points. So to make this more visual, here we have some maps for the GDP. This is also classified into low levels of GDP, medium levels of GDP, and high levels of GDP. And we can compare these heat maps to the maps of the violence index. And as you can see, there are some states that have high levels of GDP and also high levels of violence. Whereas some states with low levels of violence also have low levels of GDP.
So one of the more implications relating to the successful measure of the violence index might lead us to targeting, allocating the results in a proper way in which we actually enforce the law enforcement rulings and funding properly in accordance to those states that have a higher violence, as well as crime prevention programs in which we target those specific states, as well intervention programs that address contributing factors. Considering we're not focusing in only crime incidents or homicides, we're painting a full picture and we have a more valuable insight into what things should change. We can therefore make policy making that is based on evidence and it has valuable insights, as well as monitoring those policies and how they are being reflected. Thank you.
Now we're opening the floor for questions. Let me just pass you the mic.
Okay, my question is, there's no wrong or right answer to this, so don't feel nervous about this, okay? I was in a profession that worked with crime, and I saw the crime straight on the street, right? So I might have a different perspective of crime and GDP. How accurate do you think your analysis, because like you mentioned before, this is not all, some crime is underreported, right? Some, you're not getting an accurate picture. But I obviously saw some trends there that you showed off. How confident are you that the statistical data matches the reality of what is actually going on in Mexico as far as crime and its relation to the GDP?
So What we're trying to do is to paint a fuller picture because, as I mentioned, if we're only reporting violence as homicides or as crime incidents, it leaves out a lot of things. For example, as I mentioned, economic theory talks about crime economic theory talks about how likely it is for someone to go and commit crime for the economic gain. If we have things like what we're considering, that the perspective that police is inefficient, I know that I can commit crime, gain money, and have no consequences. So it tries to measure an overall better picture of what is happening and why is it happening, rather than just relying on data on how many people are killed, leaving to the question, are all of the people killed being recorded? So I think statistically, it would give us more data rather than just using homicides or crime incidents.
Thank you very much.
Can you tell us what is the rationale behind the positive relationship between the violence and GDP? What do you think is driving that positive association?
To answer this question, first we need to put ourselves into Mexico's context, because we know that apart from other countries, we face a different type of violence, because we have the war against the drug cartels and we also have high levels of corruption. So the rationale behind this is that maybe those states that have high levels of GDP are being affected by illegal businesses, by drug cartels, and that's why what is driving this development. And that could be reflecting to the levels of violence people suffer there. And also, I think that it could be related to the migration dynamics within the country, because whenever a city has high levels of GDP, people start going there. However, it's difficult to find opportunities here, especially good opportunities of work. So if you face yourself in a new city when you don't know anyone and you don't have the opportunity to work there, and you come from a different context, then it's easy to carry out different crimes there. Sorry, I don't understand. Go here. Okay. Okay. So yeah, of course. It's okay. So as we mentioned in the policy implications, we believe that it's important to manage these rates of crime all across the states. So the recommendations are principally for government agencies and for the organs that are in charge of managing crime, like the police. So what we are trying to say here is that it's important to manage this violence, and that this violence could be multidimensional. So it's important to make policies that account for all the different sources of violence and the impacts they could have. So if we have this violence index, we can be more aware of which states are truly more violent than others. Because if we focus only in one indicator, that, well, for example, crime incidents, it is not going to reflect the reality as accurate as if we account for all the different dimensions that violence could have. So with this indicator, we can make more accurate policies that accounts for the real necessities of that state.
Thank you for your presentation. How would you improve the study you have right now?
Well, first of all, we would like to implement more indicators to reflect like more different dimensions of violence. Because for example, we want to include crime, murder, and we are trying to find
a proxy for corruption. So we can also account for that because I think it's an important factor of violence here in Mexico.
It would be also relevant to polish our method into considering the principal component analysis, and having more data will allow us to do so in a better way, as well as Fer already mentioned, it is important to include certain variables that are not there yet, but will be in the future.
Yes.
Okay, for example, and I've always had this problem with statistics, okay? Because they never really, many academics will study something and it's a lot about means and averages and everything else. For example, you have the GDP, right? Well, everybody wants to report how much money they're making, which every state wants to look good. So the GDP may be overreported, or not overreported, but reported more accurately. And every state wants to kind of hide crime, and that's why you might have instances of unreported crime. Or victims don't report it at all because they're too scared or whatever it might be. So I see a big disparity between comparing the GDP and crime. The last question was, how would you improve your study? What other variables do you think that you could look at that could also correlate, such as poverty rates, other types of things? What other data do you think you could use to, for example, as was just asked, what other types of data do you think would improve a more accurate picture of what's going on?
Well, for starters, I think it's relevant to, we did include poverty rates, to include as well homicides rates, as Fernanda mentioned, the corruption, but also some proxy involving drug cartel crimes. But necessarily the relationship between GDP and the violence index we created is not really gonna change, because we're not proposing a GDP indicator. We're proposing the violence indicator, which also leaves a lot of space for further research, because we know econometrics is really fun and we can actually start predicting. So we could even like further our research through prediction to see if the reality of the context makes sense with the violence index we created after it's been improved.
We want to test our violence index against other economic indicators of the different states. For example, we include here informality, and it was not relevant in this regression. But if we change informality to be the dependent variable, then we could also find a positive relationship between our violence index and informality. So we want to prove that with other economic indicators to see if the relationship is still there.
Thank you.
Please, a round of applause for President.
The following presentation is with the topic of the feminist movement and women's labor force participation, insights from recent silent protest, by Amanda Lopez and Jessica Galarza. Please welcome them.
So, did you know that women's silent protests have increased worldwide in recent years, reflecting a trend that began with the historic movement of Iceland in 1975? Today, we will present the feminist movement and women's labor force participation insights from recent silent protests. In today's world, women continue to face barriers in the labor market, but in the middle of these challenges, a quiet revolution is emerging, with women raising their voices, demanding a seat at the table of opportunity. Imagine 1975 in Iceland, where thousands of women from different backgrounds came together in solidarity and organized massive strikes. Their demand was clear: equality, justice, and an end to gender discrimination. This event lit a spark that will inspire generations of women around the world to rise up and make their voices heard. Spain joined with a Day Without Women in 2018, focusing on the gender pay gap and workplace discrimination. In the United States, the Women's March, focusing on a gender pay gap, they also demand uh, labor equality and social justice. In Mexico, a Day Without Us in 2020, saw women taking the streets to address gender-based violence and discrimination, highlighting the important goals of the country's progress. In the United Kingdom, the Reclaim the Night protest aimed to reclaim safe public spaces for women, and even in Iran's restrictive society, women bravely protest against the oppressive dress codes that they are forced to wear in the Revolution Street Girl protest. Then our paper aims to explore the relationship between the feminist movement and women's labor participation, focusing on recent silent protests. We investigate the impact of them, analyzing the changes of women's labor participation before and after these protests, using a time variable. So first, the author Goldin outlines three main phases of the women's labor participation in the US. The first phase is that women had a minimal involvement in the workforce due to opportunities that align with traditional female roles. Then the expansion due to education in World War II, in which women were recognized for their value in the market. And in the third phase, there was an increase in women's labor participation due to birth control, culminating in a quiet revolution. On the other hand, research by Black indicates a decline in women's labor participation in the US since the early 2000s, and he states that factors such as the lack of maternity affect the opportunity of women in the labor force. Tahiti discusses the situation in Iran, where women have high education rates but low labor force participation due to post-revolutionary restrictions. And several papers highlight the important role of the education in promoting gender equality and increasing women's labor participation, especially in countries such as Mexico and India. And factors such as childcare subsidies, the availability of part-time jobs, and parental leave are identified as determinants in women's labor participation.
So what did we do here? Considering the background we just gave you, the countries we decided to take into consideration for our research are United States of America, which protests happened in 2017 and 2018, Spain and United Kingdom, whose protests were in 2018, Iran and India, in 2019, and finally in Mexico, that's been an annual movement that started in 2020. So the decision behind selecting a specific movement like the silent movement of protest, it's due to the lack of recordance of all of the protests happening in these countries. Therefore, we decided to choose a movement specifically in order to be quantifiable. We selected panel regression as the best model, as it allows us to omit variables that were not there. Consider a linear regression as if it was on steroids. We are helping to lose many of the individual specific effects. This is a fixed effects panel regression, considering it is based on macroeconomic variables, which are the labor force participation of women, the annual GDP growth accounting for prices of 2015, unemployment rate for women, education attainment for women that are under 25 that have completed primary school, and a time variable. We had a total of 66 observations. So as I mentioned, the study goes for panel data. Therefore, we have a period of time that started in 2012 up to 2020, and our medium year would be 2017. For starters, in our time variable, we created a dummy variable or binary variable in which those countries that presented a protest had a number 1, and those who didn't had a 0. After that, we grouped them in order to have a specific identification of country and year. And considering the 2017 to be our medium year, we subtracted the years in which we found the protest for each of the countries. Therefore, it's not a overall result. It explains each country in years. So these are the results of our regression. Unfortunately, we found that the protests, our time variable, is not statistically significant. However, I would like to start on the top. Education here has a negative sign. Ooh, why does it have a negative sign? Well, I would ask you, have you ever seen the unemployment rates for Mexican college graduates? They are really big. We would assume that if we have more education, then we'd be more of a part of the labor, right? However, this is not always true. This might be due to people wanting to pursue higher education and continue studying, not necessarily getting into the labor force straight away, and also because those people have more opportunities. As a robustness check, we decided to run the regression, again, omitting our time variable. And when we did so, we found that education was no longer statistically significant. That tells us that maybe that points into the direction that the younger generations are the ones that are being inflicted the effects of protesting. Why? Because we do not have an effect on labor participation, but we clearly have an effect in education that targets younger citizens. Then we have an unemployment rate. This right here, we have a positive relationship. We cannot have a positive relationship between unemployment and labor force participation. However, this can be explained through the added worker effect that states that in an economic recession in which the husband of a household loses its job, the woman is forced to take part into the labor market. And this is consistent with a research that was made by Malaka in the Arab Spring protests in Egypt. It talked about the effects those protests had in the labor force participation of not only women, but men as well. It stated that both unemployment and employment increased. However, that employment was only because the women were employment increased only for low quality jobs that were in the informal sector. Finally, GDP was not really relevant. It might not be a relationship between the labor force participation of women and the GDP. Even though we don't have a significant star right here in the regression, it does not mean that our efforts are unheard of. This is a macroeconomic study that is reflecting one movement a year. What this tells us is that this is not enough. One protest this year is not enough to have our voices heard. It is not enough to empower women into becoming economically independent. Just in 1970 is the first rise in the labor force participation Mexico saw. 1970 is not that long ago. We still have a long way to go and a long way to have our voices heard. Therefore, we should continue to raise our voices and we should continue to proudly be women. Thank you.
We now open the floor for any questions.
Also, this variable not being significant, maybe because you are trying to convert this one into a dummy variable. What's the cost because this is not significant?
No, but we did not use the dummy variable for the regression.
Okay.
It was a process in which we created the time variable. It starts that way as a binary variable, but it evolves into a time variable that is accounting for the years that the protest had and the change in time with our medium year that was 2017. So,
Okay. Because that doesn't make that much sense. The thing is that a country having a protest could be, for instance, in a seasonality. Every March 8 or March 9, we're going to be finding that this situation is going to be happening. But if there is a bad event, so for instance, a feminicide or something like that, we're going to be having protests, right? So this could be something that maybe if you change the way to calculate this kind of variable, could become significant.
well, it's a proxy variable to all of the protests you're mentioning. because those are not being recorded efficiently for all of the countries. And it is important to mention that we're studying the effects before and after the protest, and having a data regression accounts for all of those omitted variables that you're mentioning. So it sort of like gives a better explanation considering the variables that are here, and not taking into consideration those does not really matter here. However, I think what you're proposing in a way would be to study each country individually in more of microeconomic factors, which would be a really good way to study the effects of the feminist movement farther. There is no really a lot of research regarding it, and it should be studied. And right now, we decided to do the macroeconomic study accounting for different countries and different periods of time. However, in future research, it'd be able to study just Mexico. And it's also important to mention that the protest in Mexico just happened in 2020. We have not really received as much of the time after to fully study it.
Did you perform any descriptive analysis to compare countries with your data?
The panel
This is
data.
just a general question, just thinking about the next possible step of this research.
So what they have in common is that all of them have found this specific type of protest. That's why they were chosen, and the relationship between each other.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, girls. In your literature review, did you find more factors that can influence in this topic?
The only research as closely similar to ours was the one I stated about the Arab protest, but this movement was a bit bigger than what the silent protests have been. It's a field that has not really been studied, the relationship protests have to labor force participation in itself.
Okay. Well, maybe if you continue with this topic, analyzing more papers related with this, you can find other factors with more importance. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. So I was thinking, just complementing Dr. Leiva's comment, is what about if the protest affect first the women's rights and the laws and the regulations, and then after that, the labor force participation increases? So maybe for the future, if you maybe include a variable that is measuring women's rights in particular, maybe? I don't know if you even probably thought about it.
We did consider, we actually included a variable that talked about if there was persecution of crimes committed against women and the rights measurement sort of. And when we did so, it was omitted because it was not really relevant.
Thank you.
Oh, well, this is not like a question regarding the topic, because I think that you actually managed the information really well. And I was about to ask the same question on the prior presentation, because it's more related to you guys and the work that you've done. Like, because I have to confess, I don't really understand all of, I mean, at its fullest, all the information that you presented, but I think that you actually presented really good. But which was the biggest challenge that you find, like putting or gathering all the information and presenting it today? Like, I don't know if you guys find any challenges or any concerns, or do you have any tips for maybe us here in the audience to actually try to do something like this someday or something?
I would say the hardest part of economic research is always gathering the data. It took us almost half of the semester to actually get a proper data set that includes all of the variables. We tested some, they didn't work, we changed them, and it's a really tedious process. I'd say after you've gotten your data set, everything else is smooth sailing.
Second round of applause.
Finally, the students Galilea Villalba and Fernanda Garcia are presenting Home Office Impact in Mexico and its relation to job informality economics. Please welcome them.
Good afternoon, everyone. Today we're here to present you our paper titled Home Office Impact in Mexico and its Relation to Job Informality Economics. Well, first of all, we know that the COVID-19 pandemic really shifted the way in which we perceived many of our daily life aspects. And of course, working was not an exception. With the proper spread of social distancing measures, of course, also the widespread working from home started to increase also. And now if we want to have a formal definition of informality, we can take a look into the ULICEA 2023 definition, in which informality is defined as workers or firms who do not comply with the regular laws and regulations that are required. And for worker, we can boil it down to just having a regular or formal contract or not. This, of course, presents a complex challenge that has been magnified with the rise of home office practices. And as traditional structures start to dissolve and the boundaries between work and home start to blur, of course, the limits of formal employment start to become increasingly ambiguous. That is why the aim of our study is to show and illustrate the interplay and intersection between these two topics, working from home and informality, but especially in the context of Mexico. So now, as what other authors have said, we can divide them into two: the information on working from home and informality. The first two are, we can refer to a study by Barrero, Bloom, and Davis, in which it was shown that based on the preferences of workers, they were surprised by their ability to work more productively at their houses, which of course translated into strong preferences of remote work post-pandemic. And now for developing countries, we can also notice that Saltier and Gaultier also mentioning the impact and importance of highlighting the understanding of the heterogeneity of working from home capabilities across different occupational and demographical groups. And in terms of informality, especially in the context of Latin America and developing countries, we need to take into account that Latin America is characterized by high levels of informality, averaging above more than 50%. And of course, this implies that a large segment of the work population is working without protection to unforeseen fluctuations in the labor market. And as for developing countries, the prominence of informal firms is also substantial, constituting up to half of the economic activity in these countries, which also provides livelihoods and opportunities for billions of people in these countries.
Okay, so for the data, the main source employed was the telephonic survey about COVID-19 and the labor force that was carried out by the Mexican Bureau of Statistics and Geography. So this survey is representative for the Mexican population of both genders and above 18 years of age. So it was designed and carried out from April to July of 2020, and it is to collect basic data regarding the effects of COVID-19 pandemic on the labor market. So an important remark here is that information about home office is very limited, So that's why the survey is only for 3 months. And these are our descriptive statistics. As you can see, we had up to 25,000 observations, and our variables are dummy variables apart from the age categories. So here we are testing for informality. In this study, informality is defined as not having health services. Also, we are accounting for higher education, which is defined as having higher education or not. In higher education, we include technical degrees, career degrees, and postgraduate degrees. And also the type of occupation that is divided into being an employee or employer. So for the methodology, we choose to use a logic model because it has a more extensive literature. Also, it is more robust to outliers, and the results could be easily interpreted as odd ratios. So to apply this type of model, we are assuming that the data have a logistic distribution, and also we are clustering standard by state, so we are accounting for idiosyncrasies. And here we have the basic form of a logic model, which is basically telling us that the probabilities of working from home are going to depend on a set of different personal characteristics. It could be more easily seen here, where we can display all the different factors we're taking into consideration. And also to calculate the marginal effects, what we are doing is basically remove the effect of all the different factors apart from the one we are calculating from the effect of all the factors together. So here for the results, we have a marginal effects graph. As you can see, we have the 0 line here. So if any variable is close to that point, it means that it has not a great impact or it is not statistically significant. Whereas we are moving up here, we are having positive effects, and under the 0 line, we are negative effects. So some things we can note here is that, for example, for the informality, being an informal worker could reduce your opportunities to work from home in as much as 10%. The other variables that had a great impact was schooling. So for those that have higher education, they are up to 20% more likely to work from home. And also the occupation, those that are classified as employers have great opportunities to work from home. Whereas in the age categories, we can see that around age category 8, so about 50, we have a peak on the likeliness to work from home. Whereas for experience, it's not really relevant. So acknowledging that there could be a self-selection bias for female workers, we decide to divide the effects also for gender. So here in this graph, you can see the effects of for male and for female. So as you can see, overall the changes are almost the same. However, we can see that for male population, the effects are more marked, they are more significant. For example, being an informal worker is going to affect you being less likely to work from home, more than minus 10%. And also we can see that the occupation is more significant for them than for the whole population or for female workers. As being an employer increase their opportunities to work from home for above 20%. We can also see something interesting regarding the age categories, and is that for female workers, they have like 2 peaks around age category 5 and then around age category 8. So this could be related to the dynamics and life cycle of women. And for male participants, we have a more smooth effect around the age categories. So also it's important to mention that having bigger effects in the male category, it's probably due because in a first instance, male are more likely to work from home than female.
So now, based with the information that we have provided, we can conclude that even if the literature has provided valuable insights into both of the topics of remote work and informality, We suggest that there are still potential avenues for future research and policy interventions in these matters, especially in the context of Mexico, since there is a lack of information and data on this matter. Of course, this provides an opportunity to fill this gap with further research and now involve maybe the relationship between these topics and how could they affect, for instance, inequality, tax collection, and social mobility. Finally, we notice the importance of addressing several concerns, for instance, the access to technology and understanding the heterogeneity of remote work capabilities, and also fostering the growth of the formal sector, which are key considerations for policymakers and researchers that want to increase the development of economic development and reducing informality in Mexico. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Any questions?
Now we're opening the floor for questions. If anyone.
Thank you. Thank you for your presentation, guys. Please, could you back the previous one? What does it mean, HCAT?
These are
Maybe-
the age categories. So we have the population from 18 years to above 60 years. So they are divided into groups of 5. For example, the base category here was from 18 to 23, and then all the other categories are advancing, say,
Thank you.
following the same
Thank you, I didn't understand that.
classification. Like about 50 years. So it was interesting because we think that young people could be more likely to work from home as they have more abilities to manage computers and all that stuff, right? But here, the important thing to remark is that our data was only collected from 3 months, and it was in the context of the pandemic. So at that time, formal workers that work at an office and have a formal status, and informal workers that work at an office and have like a, to say, a job that they know they are not going to lose. So they have like a regular status of working, right? They were all sent to working from home because of the pandemic that required that. So that's why these results could like not be applied to this time as they were applicable for the time of the COVID-19 pandemic. That's also why we could see some differences, like having male being more likely to work from home than female, when the literature is telling us that, well, female prefer more flexibility and freedom when they are choosing their work. So it's important to know that we require more data. It's important to make more surveys and follow these trends, because we don't know if these trends continue to be like this after the COVID-19 pandemic, because there's no data about that.
Does anyone else has a question?
But do you think, like based on the report that you just did and the presentation, do you think businesses are more likely or not to continue giving home office options to their workers? As, I mean,
Yeah, of course. Like overall, from what we can observe in our own context, working from home is like a big trend. It is a big deal. A lot of people is fascinated with how they can manage their time and their abilities to work from home. So there's like a significant trend of people switching to working from home. And I think it's important to follow which effects this have, because here we are only exploring the effects it has in informal workers. So we are seeing that they are less likely to work from home. How can we fix that? Because we already know that informal workers have no medical services and no insurance. So we already have policies to adjust for that. How can we adjust for that when we are working from home, when there's the context of remote work? And also how it is affecting other things and other dynamics into the economics. Because, for example, home office is likely to increase gentrification that we are facing here because we have a lot of foreigners that are working from home, earning in a foreign currency, and they are like changing the market here. So how are home office changing the overall labor market, and how can we make policies to control that?
Now, I know that you mentioned that your conclusion is we need more studies, right? So if we need more studies, is there something else that you would look at? I'll just give one example, the benefit to a company. For example, during COVID-19, a lot of companies discovered if we place these people at their house, we don't have to rent office space, or we don't have to pay for the air conditioning bill. What other types of studies or data would you personally like to collect other than just how do you like working from home, or the statistics that you have, what little data that you have? It might affect the overall results. What personally would you change, not change, but what data would you collect extra if you had a chance to do an extra study or an extra survey to complement this data?
Okay, thank you very much. So I would like to have data to, first of all, see if the gender trend is continuous after the pandemic. And also I think that it will be interesting to know if the economic sector you are working for has an effect into how likely you are to be switching to work from home. Because for example, we know that if we are selling products, we can sell them online. So I want to know if those companies that sells products are more likely to change to work from home than those that, I don't know, work in the primary sector, like agriculture, extracting things. Well, obviously those can work from home, right? But they could also contribute because you also have engineers in a mine, right? So how the economic sector you are working for affects your likeliness to work from home, and also how wages change, because it's the same working from home. You're going to receive the same wage that if you are working in an office. I would like to go deeper into that.
Do you have any concerns about reverse causality in your regression, in the sense that working from home can impact informality? Because you're studying working from home being impacted by informality, but can this relationship be the other way around, do you think?
Yes, of course, I think that that's a possibility because we know that the activities that can be carried out online, like working from home, are very vast and diverse. Because, for example, we know that a lot of people do freelance. So maybe informality could be causing more people to work from home, because we also know from the literature that people that work informally tend to prefer freedom over other benefits. So working from home does also give you a lot of freedom. So is there a relationship? That I think that could be also interesting to research.
Anyone else? That's it. Let's give a round of applause.
First of all, I'd like to thank first the entire audience, everyone that is here, either presential or in the Zoom meeting, for coming to this event and supporting our very own students. I'd like to send a third round of applause to all our participants, because it's never easy to participate in these events and to show off all your hard work. So please, a third round of applause to all our participants. I'd like to extend our deepest gratitude, of course, to the professors who have been helping our very own students with these projects and giving them the knowledge and everything that they could, all the experience, and basically guiding them throughout their academic journey, leading them to actually develop these kinds of projects. So as well, thank you so much, professors of the business department and economics department, for your involvement in our education. And I'd like to extend an invitation to tomorrow's next part of the creative stage, which will be poster presentations for both the business and the science department. And I'd like to extend a second invitation to students that are currently in the audience for next year to maybe present your very own projects for the next annual CQ-AState. So thank you very much, everyone. Oh, wait, I forgot to say also to the judges joining us both presentially and online also, thank you very much for coming and for helping us with our event. So yes, thank you. Thank you to all of you for coming to this event.